Hey everybody, Mr. Miller, your friendly neighborhood biology teacher, here to show you how to do a dihybrid Punnett square. So this is our Punnett square for a dihybrid cross. Remember dihybrid crosses, we have two traits. I've got trait 1 and trait 2 over here. We're going to label that in a minute. Then we're going to label of those two traits what the two alleles are for that trait and what the two alleles are for this trait, because remember there's two alleles for every trait. Then we're going to label which allele is dominant and which one is recessive for this trait, which is dominant and which is recessive for this trait. Then we are going to complete the dihybrid cross, and then we are going to calculate the percentages of what the offspring are with a certain combination of those two traits. Okay, so let's start off by reading the question here. The question says that two mammals with the genotype big C, big E, little e are crossed. So we already know that the two parents are going to be big C, big E, little e. Now, in case you wonder why I put a line through this C here, it's because a big C and a little c, when you handwrite it, look very similar. And so I put a line through it to indicate that that is a small c and not a big C to avoid confusion, okay? So it says that both parents have this genotype. So I'm actually going to put this for both parents. And you kind of have to write sideways here. Big C, little c, big E, little e. Now this is an electronic version, so if you were actually doing this, it'd be a lot easier. If you're handwriting it, you can just write it out left to right, normal, it doesn't matter. But these are the two parents. Big C produces a thick coat of fur and is dominant to little c, which produces a thin fur coat. And big E produces brown eyes and is dominant to little e, which is for red eyes, okay? So we don't get things mixed up, we're going to label that over here. So trait 1, it talked about fur thickness. We have thick and thin. And over here, trait 2, we have eye color. We have red and brown. In fur, the dominant allele was a capital C. The recessive is a lowercase c. The capital C means a thick coat of fur. And the lowercase c is recessive. That means a thin coat of fur. Eye color, the two alleles here, let's see what they are. E, brown eyes, and little e, red eyes. Okay, so the dominant is big E for brown, and the recessive is little e for red. Okay, so now we've got our traits, we've got our alleles, we know which one's dominant, which one's recessive. We know our parents' genotypes. Now we're ready to fill out the parents' squares. Remember, we have to do that before we can fill out the middle part to predict the offspring. So let's fill out and set up the parent squares first. And remember, in a dihybrid cross, we don't have one letter or one allele in each of these parent squares. We have two. Because it's a dihybrid cross, we're looking at two traits, not just one. Parent 2, same thing. There's going to be two alleles in each of these parent boxes as well. Now, which two letters go in here? Well, in a previous video, we discussed the FOIL method, F-O-I-L, which stands for first, outside, inside, last. And what that means is that we are going to take the first, outside, inside, and last letters of each parent's genotypes, and we're going to fill them in those respective boxes. Now, don't actually write or type in FOIL into these boxes. That's just for me to show you where we're putting the first letters outside, inside, and last, and show you how that works. Okay, so F means first. That means the first letter of each allele type. We have C's and we have E's. So we're going to take the first C and the first E and those are going to be our first, okay? So the first C is a big C, and the first E is a big E. Then we're going to do the next one, which is O for outside. This means the two outside letters. The two outside letters of these four letters are a big C and the little e. I stands for inside. That means the two inside letters, this little c and this big E. We're going to put little c, big E. And then the last two letters of each allele type, the last C and the last E, which are a little c and a little e. Okay, so that's parent 1. And parent 2 is the same. It's the same genotype, big C, big E, little e, as parent 1. So we know that these are also going to be the same. So I'm just going to copy that down. Big C, big E, big C, little e, little c, big E, little c, little e. Now, if parent 2 was different, I'd have to do the first outside, inside, last again. Okay, so don't always copy the first parent and put it in the second parent. So I'm going to erase this now because we don't need that. That was just an illustration to show you. Now we're ready to actually do the cross. And remember, when we do the cross, we are mixing and matching. So we're going to mix these two together here, and we're going to match the C's together and the E's together. We're not going to put C, E, C, E. We're going to put two C's and then two E's. But are they going to be big or little? Well, that depends on what's in the squares here. So we've got big C, and then big E, big E. And we've got big C, and we got big E, little e. Big C, little c, big E, big E. Big C, little c, big E, little e. Okay, and we're going to do that all the way down. So feel free to fast forward through this next part, because I'm just going to be doing that same thing all the way down. Big C, little e, little e. Big C, little c, big E, little e. Big C, little c, little e, little e. Big C, little c, big E, big E. Big C, little c, big E, little e. Little c, big E, big E. Little c, big E, little e. Big C, little e. Big C, little c, little e, little e. Little c, big E, little e. Little c, little e, little e. Okay. So now we are done with the Punnett square, the dihybrid cross. We have our results. There are 16 squares, 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a 16 square grid here that shows us all the possible outcomes of what the offspring could be. They're not all different. Some of these are repeats. There might be 4 of a certain genotype or 8 of a certain genotype. But what we're going to do is we are going to now look at what it's asking us. It's asking us to predict the percent chance that the offspring will have thick fur with brown eyes. That's what it says here, in case you can't read it. So remember, thick fur and brown eyes. So the only way, you only need one dominant allele to represent the dominant trait. Thick fur is dominant. So we only need one dominant C in a square for that genotype to express the dominant trait. For brown eyes, the same thing. Brown eyes is capital E, it's dominant. So because it's dominant, we only need one big E, or dominant E in the square, for that genotype to express brown eyes, the dominant brown eyes. Okay? So in other words, thick fur and brown eyes, if the genotype has just one big C and just one big E, it's going to be thick fur with brown eyes. So we need to count how many of these squares have at least one big C and one big E. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9. Okay, so 9 have thick fur with brown eyes out of a total possible 16 squares. So 9 out of 16, you take 9 divided by 16, and it comes out to, it's just over half, so it'll be 0.54-ish. Okay? In your calculator, you're going to take 9 and divide it by 16. That's how you find out that percentage. And then it'll say like 0.54. I don't know if it's 54. I'm literally doing this in my head right now. But it's somewhere around that. And it'll say 0.54, but just know that that means 54%. Remember, you got to move the decimal over 2 spots. Okay? So let's just say it is 0.54. That's 54%. Then you're going to do the same thing with thick fur with red eyes. Remember, to have the recessive trait, which is red eyes are recessive. Okay? So the only way that you can have red eyes is if both of your eye alleles are both recessive. That's the only way the recessive trait gets expressed, is if both alleles are recessive. In other words, they will only have red eyes if both E's are little e, little e. And all we need is one dominant thick fur allele to have thick. So we're looking for at least one big C, and we need both E's to be little. So how many of these 16 squares have one big C but 2 little E's? Let's see. 1, 2, 3. So 3 out of 16 are going to have thick fur with red eyes. Once again, 3 out of 16. I don't have a calculator on me, but you take 3 out of 16, whatever number you get, point something something, that's the percentage. Those first 2 numbers, that's percentage. Remember, you're going to move the decimal over 2, and that will give you the percentage. And then you put that there. Okay? So it should be around a little less than 20. And that is a dihybrid cross.